Thank you so much for joining me, Caitlin, here today at Yoga Fusion to chat about meditation and mindfulness practices.
I'm delighted to be here, Mariah, so thank you very much for inviting me.
Amazing. Well, first off, can you tell me what is meditation and what is mindfulness, and are there any differences between the two?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I guess when we start to parse them out and define them, meditation is more of the formal practice. So often we know it as a seated meditation practice. We imagine someone perhaps on a cushion somewhere, eyes closed, versus mindfulness is really a way of being, an awareness. So most famously, Jon Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness as a state of awareness, a non-judgmental presence to what's unfolding as is. So it's this way of relating to experience. And there can be mindfulness meditation practices where we're paying attention deliberately to experience as it's unfolding. Whereas there can also be mindfulness practices that are done incidentally, mindfully brushing your teeth, or I think of mindful yoga practices, something I'm very familiar with. Walking meditation practices are also a form of mindfulness in a way where you're paying attention to what's unfolding. Meditation could also be a concentration practice, listening to or repeating a sound or paying attention to an object. Or what's becoming more and more popular now is we're starting to see the benefits for helping professionals and individuals who might suffer compassion fatigue is loving kindness practices. So cultivating a sense of compassion deliberately as part of a meditation.
So are you suggesting that different styles of meditation create different outcomes for the meditator?
Certainly. So when we say meditation, since it is a different practice, these different practices train different elements, different experiences in our lives. So when I mentioned the loving kindness meditation, it will essentially train us in cultivating a sense of compassion, and often results, for instance, in increased positive affect, which means positive mood, a sense of well-being and joy. Whereas a concentration practice will actually support us in enhancing our attentional capacities, for instance. Or a focus on breath has this really nice side effect of perhaps feeling more relaxed, which is a common misperception of meditation because we think, oh, it'll help us relax, but that's not the case with all styles.
You hear people sit down and they go to meditate and they think that it's supposed to be relaxing, and then they come out of this 5-minute, 10-minute, half an hour sitting and they're like, that was not relaxing at all.
For sure, and I think that's really important for people to understand, because if we have this expectation that I should feel more relaxed from this practice and that's not happening, we might feel like it's not working or we're doing something wrong. But actually learning to be with an experience as it's unfolding, and particularly this is why mindfulness does have so much coverage and is so topical right now, that experience of being with what is, being aware of what is, actually allows us to feel what's going on in our lives and in ourselves much better. So I like the saying, the point or the practice of meditation is not to help us feel better, but to help us feel better.
I like that.
It's really nice, isn't it? It's a nice way of reminding ourselves that if we can sit with grief, sadness, physical discomfort, and be able to hold space for that, then we've got more room in our lives to pivot and move towards things that are meaningful and bring us a sense of purpose.
That is really beautiful. So we often also hear about meditation having these range of benefits. So we hear about reducing anxiety, stress, depression, helping with empathy, helping with compassion. What are some of the evidence-based practices that can create these effects in the meditator?
We know, for instance, as you said, that meditation, and specifically styles of meditation that have been really well established or well studied in the West, so where we really value our scientific, evidence-based practice, might be mindfulness-based stress reduction or mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, which are types of meditation that follow a really strict protocol so that we can then go, okay, this person had the exact same training and experience as this person, which makes it easier to evaluate. And we're finding that meditation or these mindfulness-based practices do decrease the anxiety that people are reporting or experiencing, lessen the likelihood that they would, for instance, experience a relapse of depression if that's something they've struggled with a few times in the past. We know that it lifts our mood, so our sense of positive effect. But again, what's a little bit interesting there is they try and parch out in these practices, in these protocols, we call them, what bits support what. So for instance, there might be some mindful moving, or we might know it as yoga that's included in these practices. There are really short meditations, like 3-minute breathing spaces that we're doing today, a little bit later. And there's of course, seated meditations, whether people are sitting on the floor, on a chair, or laying down. And we try and go, well, what's helping with what? And some of the mindful movement practices are actually looking like they might be the ones that support this lift in the mood, whereas some of the seated meditation practices might be more attributable to the attentional and the memory benefits we see. So we're definitely seeing benefits. I don't think that's in dispute. And what we've actually seen in a really seminal Harvard study is that most of us, in the moments of our lives, are not paying attention to what's going on. So it's near 50% of our waking life. We're not here, we're not present. And it doesn't actually matter what activity we're doing. When we're present, we're actually experiencing heightened well-being. So we feel better about things. Whereas when we're disconnected, when we're not present, when we're not mindful, we report a lower level of well-being. So that might be one of the reasons that these mindfulness, these meditation practices actually lift our mood and cultivate a sense of well-being in different domains. We also see that our brains change. So with the practice of meditation, we see structural changes that can be measured in, for instance, fMRI scans, which is incredible, as well as starting to see changes in what's happening in our body at a physiological level. So our levels of inflammation might go down, our epigenetic profile, which is just a fancy way of saying, the genes that might turn on illness or turn on wellness, are transformed through these practices, and the research is still really unfolding. It's still early days, so I don't want to say meditation or mindfulness is a panacea for everything, but something is happening, something measurable, something positive is happening. And if it feels good in our lives, what a brilliant practice, because there are very few side effects to paying a bit more attention as we walk through our day, or setting aside 3 minutes to breathe, to be, and to notice what is going on for us and to be with what's there.
If somebody is having a challenging time sitting down with their thoughts, like it is just too much to sit down and be with themselves in that moment in time, what would you suggest?
To leave that, definitely to leave it. I think that's really important that you highlight it, because when we say, oh, there's no side effects, in actuality, it's not necessarily appropriate for all of us to sit in, for instance, a dimly lit room with our eyes closed and be with what's going on when it might be quite distressing for us. And we want to practice these practices with compassion. So it might be then, okay, well, doing something seated and still is not helpful. Maybe I can move my body. So maybe it's a mindful movement practice like yoga, where we start to connect in and notice what's coming up for us. Maybe it's mindful walking, one foot and then the other. Maybe for some people it's mindful coloring or mindful clay work. There can be lots of ways of applying mindfulness to our daily lives that is a step away from a formal seated meditation practice, and that's okay. It's also really beneficial to bring this awareness into our daily lives.
So for anybody who's just starting out, any words for those people?
Yeah, do what works. We might have this idealistic view in our head. Okay, well, I've never, meditated in my life, and my life is very busy, and I'm going to sit down and do 2 hours every day, and that's not reasonable. My advice would be to do little bits and pieces, to reach out and seek supports. If there are meditation groups in your community, you could seek resources that way. You could start out counting your breaths. You could do a 3-minute breathing space, which will teach you on the holistic approach. You could also download an app. There are a couple of really fantastic apps. One is Headspace, so it has even little videos that people can follow along with to cultivate meditation practices, but also to cultivate mindfulness practices that are less formal, that are embedded in daily life. And the Healthy Minds program is a brilliant app that was developed by neuroscientist Richard Davidson, and it has a number of different skills that it cultivates. It actually measures you before you start using the app, and it measures along the way to provide evidence, markers as to how these practices that you're doing through the app, such as meditation practices, such as reflections on your purpose and where you want to be going in life, how this is altering your emotional state. So I think that Healthy Minds program is a fantastic app to use as well.
Amazing. What a wonderful way to be able to track that.
Yes, exactly, because I think tracking builds momentum, doesn't it? If we see, oh wow, look, my levels of compassion have increased, or my ability to be present in a moment, my awareness has increased, then we're going to go, okay, this is working, rather than sitting down each day for 10 minutes and going, what's happening in my life, if we're not immediately feeling reinforced for it.
Absolutely, I'm sold. Well, thank you so much. This conversation has been so illuminating. I've learned so much from you today. I'm really excited to sit down with you and have you guide us through this meditation.
Oh, it'll be my absolute pleasure, Mariah. So thank you for making this space to have this conversation. I think it's really important.